everybody, and welcome to Talking Horticulture. And today we are going to be talking about hedges to coincide with National Hedgerow Week 2021 that has been launched over the UK. We thought it'd be very fitting to discuss hedges and the importance of hedges in Ireland. We're just going to be going through a few topics on hedges in the law and Native Irish hedges, and so these are a few things we're going to be talking about over the next little while in this podcast. Michael, what are hedges?
Well, I suppose it's is it a conglomerate of plants growing in a linear fashion? I suppose you can have your field hedgerows or garden hedgerows. Would that be would I be true or correct in saying that?
Yeah, so you're nearly there. A hedgerow, the technical term, is a line of closely planted trees or shrubs planted to form a barrier. So yeah, I'd say most likely they were planted to be stock barriers for agricultural use, to keep cattle in or to mark the territory of a field or a land. So that's the kind of the terminology of it. And the most prevalent hedge that we have in Ireland is probably our Native Irish hedges, and they're coming into a bit of
hot water in terms of how they're being managed with the restriction on cutting hedges during the nesting season, which is from the 1st of March up until the 31st of August, which narrows the window where
farmers and landowners can manage their hedgerows to allow the birds and the wildlife to thrive in the nesting season. This has caused the abundance of nature to thrive in one respect, but also it's caused a lot of friction between when you can and can't cut your hedge. What do you think about this ban, Michael? Is it for the greater good, or is it causing more harm?
So it's Section 40 of the Wildlife Act 1976 breaks that down into two separate offences. First, that it's an offence for the person to cut, grab, burn, or otherwise destroy, as you said, from in that time period. And you know, I suppose it's super important in one sense of the word, because most, and it would apply in most agricultural situations where hedges were really being absolutely decimated, with both hedge cutters and with machinery pulling them all out, you know, to make larger fields, to allow bigger machinery to operate and to make more space for the machinery. You know, small fields don't work when you have massive machines. So if there was no regulation on it, it was going to be just a free-for-all. Now, the only issue there with it all is that, and it's only, I think, this year I've seen a lot more prosecutions in regards to the follow-up on it from National Parks and Wildlife. I don't know if there was, going back, did you ever see much prosecutions with it?
No, it's really become more prevalent in the last couple of years that they're kind of, by the looks of things, they're picking out one or two people and naming and shaming them and getting the word out there that they're willing to go and prosecute you. But like a lot of things in this country, do they have the manpower to follow up every person that steps out of line that cuts hedges? They probably don't. So like my issue with the hedge cutting ban is I think I am all for it. I think it's fantastic. It's does exactly what it says in the tin in terms of protecting the birds in the nesting season. But I find that there's a bit of a blind panic when it comes to February, when people realise that, I'm not going to be able to cut this hedge now until September. And every tractor is mounted with a hedge cutter or a flail, and untold damage is being done to our hedgerows in the month of February just to get it done. And a lot of the stuff probably doesn't need to be done. Like a lot of times it just needs a little bit of a trim and a tidy. Like that's what I'm kind of seeing, that there's a lot of butchering of hedges being done in February.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one thing that is, they can find that people go too hard on them. You know, there's a lot to be said for, especially in agricultural circumstances, where hedges are maybe only cut on a 3-year basis or a 4-year basis. Do they really need to be boxed clean every year? Why do we feel the need to do that? Like,
yeah, I agree with you. I think if we can look at the approach of how we manage our hedgerows in terms of like a 3-year cycle, that it's not all about the nesting season. It's the hedgerows support a wide range of wildlife and stuff like that, and allowing your hedgerows to flower throughout the summer for our pollinators to come in and to forage, and the hedgerows to fruit, and let them bear the fruit right up until Christmas and the New Year, where you have food for the birds and the bees. And so they've a lot of benefits for kind of pulling the brakes on your management practices in terms of managing your hedge.
I would agree, and I think that it makes a much better wildlife corridor than for wildlife to use. It also, if you are keeping stock on the land, you know, during bad weather, it gives shelter as well. It's a shelter belt. We don't want to create Serengeti plains. The idea, if we go back to the idea of what we said at the beginning of why they were planted, that it was also to give shelter to animals on the land, somewhere for them to go when there was nothing there, although it divided up people's property. But it also had other benefits like that as well, which I think are very, very important.
So not only are hedges stock barriers for animals, we have a lovely relationship with hedges and hunting them into our back gardens, our front gardens, and they create shelter for our own houses, and they create a bit of a barrier for ourselves. But one big issue with hedges is how they interact with our neighbours, and the issues that arise with a hedge that's being either intensely maintained or not maintained at all. It can cause a lot of friction with your neighbours. Like what sort of issues is there with hedges not being maintained between your semi-detached house in the suburbs that has a Laeland hedge in between Michael and Jimmy?
Would that happen to be the one-eyed Jimmy that was on that digger? He's a bit of a go-by, that fella. Back again. Yeah, it's especially if you have a neighbour that's not maintaining the hedge, you know. Now, of course, you're more than entitled to cut it back to your boundary line. It can get into a argy-bargy when you start to want to cut the top of it, because it's now grown up to such a height that it's putting a massive shadow cast over your garden. You know, that's people's right to light and right to a view is a hairy-fairy area. Some people feel that they have a right to a view. I think that's questionable. You have a right to light, all right, but it's very difficult, I think, once you get it cut back to the boundary, it's very difficult to force them into either reducing it in height or getting it removed totally. No?
Yeah. In terms of a lot of things come up, I read articles about. I moved into a house 20 years ago, and my neighbour has been there for 50 years, and the hedge has been there before I moved in. And the argument of, well, I was there before the hedge, or the hedge was there before me. What's your kind of view on that? Like, with a right to light, like, is it just tough luck if you buy a house and there's a big hedge beside you?
No, I think, you know, if it's encroaching on your property, where you'd need to be looking there is that you'd want to be going for your property maps to get that exact boundary line, you know, so that you can prove where the point of the origin of the hedge is grown for a start. And you would also be looking at, is it causing any structural damage to anything within the property boundaries, and work from there. You know, where someone says, and it's going back to our other podcast in relation to trees, you know, it's a 200-year-old tree, or it's a 150-year-old hedge. It's been there for years. It's there before we were. You know, this is where now houses now, and you get that in many of our new housing estates, where the hedge was there and properties are now encroaching on it. Unfortunately, they're going to have to be managed now and maybe cut to a suitable size. Maybe not to top them, but to prune in the sides enough, maybe. I suppose if you're dealing with your neighbour next door, again, you're going to have to be to and fro between both of you, really, I'd say, to try and, you know, and if you're not getting any satisfaction from them, you're looking at going down the route of a solicitor, and without cut it to the boundary line, and then if you need to go for more, you're looking at a solicitor and small courts, the district court, and all of that.
It can get messy in that respect. Like, it can get messy.
Yeah, very, very messy.
Between the two of us, Michael, we have cut enough hedges to probably span the length and breadth of Ireland at this stage. And we've probably cut every single type of hedge, size of hedge. What's your favourite type of hedge to maintain, and what's your least favourite type of hedge to maintain?
Oh, well, it depends, I suppose. If you were cutting a nice evergreen Laeland there or something, it's grand and handy on a hedge trimmer if it's been maintained regularly. If it hasn't, and you're up on the top of it going along, that's not fun. A beech hedge as well is grand. It's very handy maintained. But I think if you were planting a hedge, you get a nice native mix. One place you always come across, well, I always think they are, and unfortunately they're boxed, but that's because of traffic, is the motorway. And you'll notice if you drive down along, maybe like the likes of the M4 or that, you'll have a kind of a native mix there in the middle of it. You have a bit of hawthorn and a whole field maple and that sort of stuff. And I think that can be quite a pleasant looking hedge in both winter and summer. Some people always go for the likes of a laurel or a griselinia, but I think they look very clinical, maybe, or fake. Would that be the word you'd use?
Yeah, they're cheap and cheerful, and they're very samey. They don't change very much. They're very, all seasons of the year, they kind of look the exact same, and they're probably instant shelter, instant impact, instant privacy, and it doesn't really kind of bode well for promoting your biodiversity interests. And sometimes when you get like a Laeland hedge or a Laurel hedge, and you're planting them out your front garden in a flower bed that's only a foot wide, it's the wrong place to put it. So that's my big bugbearer, is probably the Laurel hedge, and seeing it where they plough out lovely native Irish hedgerows in new housing estates, and the first thing the landscaper goes and gets is the English laurel and plonks it in, and it's a hedge within a year. But look, they're ugly old brutes. I can't stand them. And even no matter what way you go about them, you can't keep them well. There's no hedge cutter that cuts them nicely. They are always tearing the leaves and stuff like that, and it's hard to make an English laurel look well.
They do, and then you end up where it gets to the point from continuous cutting where you come to these kind of hard points on it all the time, and you kind of have to go in and give it a very hard cutting back to get kind of fresh shoots, lighter shoots coming out, on it, because otherwise they become very woody, don't they?
They do, and this kind of harps back to what's the best type of hedge. And we've mentioned our native hedges, and you've mentioned a few names there of what's in our native hedge: our white thorns, or our crab apples, our dog rose, our brambles, our hazels, our black thorns. These are what are commonly found across our hedgerows across the country, and they're probably the most forgiving hedge in terms of rejuvenation. You can nearly cut these hedges to the butt and they'll sprout back up again, and they'll be as good again in 5 years' time. You can't do that with a laurel hedge or a Laeland. They don't work the same way. It's a native hedge has a lot of benefits in terms of they can be forgiven if you want to manage them a bit more harshly or make them smaller. You might wait a bit of time to bring them back, but they do come back.
Yeah, I think it's like the tree planting. It's something you'd want to be concentrating on, and you'll notice in many houses and I'm thinking of houses out in the countryside now, is that where someone plants a laurel hedge, it looks fake looking, but where somebody plants native around the house, it makes the house fit into the landscape much better. And I think if you're looking at planning permissions, I know they're trying to get rid of a lot of the ribbon tail developments and our one-off housing, but for anything that is being built, it's something that should be focused on, is to make sure that it's native planting going in, that it fits into the landscape, because the The laurel can really be like you got a big highlighter, and you drew a line around the outline of the site where it just makes it stand out. And especially where you get one that's gone kind of yellowy, from cutting it. We were actually only talking about that the other day, weren't we? Actually, about the color change in them.
Yeah, they kind of they get a bit hungry. I find is if they don't like the ground they're in, they don't go that lovely vibrant green, and yeah, they can look very insipid looking. There's nothing that can beat a managed native Irish hedge, in my opinion. And I was just reading a great article there before we came on there from Chagas, and I'll share it in the comments of the video below, but it kind of goes about all the research that they've done about hedges across the country and the amount of nature and biodiversity they support and the amount of carbon they catch and stuff like that. But the most interesting slide I saw on it was the managed v unmanaged hedges around the country. And the further away you get from Dublin, so let's say Dublin, Meath, Kildare, the hedges are maintained, very well maintained. But the second you get into the more further out into your Laois, your Offaly's, your Leitrim's, your Galway's, the hedges are unmaintained. I thought that was a very interesting study that they did, and it's a very clear line. I don't know if that's got to do with population or what is that too, but I'll share the slides there because it's a very interesting read. You mentioned this last week, Michael, about ecosystem services and what they bring to trees. It's the same to be said for hedges.
Yes, very much so. Like anything, they're still a carbon sink. They're still providing clean air because they're made up of trees and smaller shrubs, I suppose is what I would define them under. So they're still providing a huge amount of benefits to the area. Now, this idea of where they're being retained in many of the new housing estates is fine in one sense of the word, because they will provide these ecosystem services. But the problem is that during the course of construction, they haven't been protected like the trees. And what you find now is that over time they'll reduce in leaf cover, they're dying off, and they now become a hazard with large, dead trees sitting in it. Dead hawthorn falls over and falls in a child, that sort of stuff. So yes, they are very beneficial. It's out in our agricultural fields, it's more than we should be putting in, and there's so much space for planting more and more and more into our hedgerows. Absolutely huge amount. And even in our agricultural settings, for drainage, they're soaking up water. That's why they're along ditch lines as well. Our older generations were extremely clever. Dig a ditch and plant a tree along it because they're going to soak up the water out of the ditch. So there's so many benefits to it that we underestimate and forget about, I think, anyway.
Yeah, I think it's a philosophy that I kind of live by, is to kind of take a step back and look at what our ancestors did and how they managed the land. I find it fascinating that what they did with literally no machinery, and they were able to manage the land in such a way that you're working with nature, not against it. Whereas our approach in the kind of 21st century is that we'll knock out all the hedges, and see that ditch, we'll pipe it and we'll put a footpath over it, and all the water will just run underground, and we won't have any barriers, any natural hedges to stop wind. Why are we kind of overcomplicating it? Let's look back to the old ways. Look at how our grandfathers and great grandfathers managed the land with open ditches, hedges, and allow all the water kind of run naturally.
Yeah, we're moving away from that point of where this idea of wanting to fill in all these ditches and pull out the hedges. That's what I was saying about trying to get bigger machinery into fields. If we're going to do that, we need to be replanting what we're taking out. I don't agree with that, and I think it might be something we could cover on in another podcast, is that the idea of increasing the size of our machinery, that it's becoming an issue for the likes of soil compaction and all of that sort of thing. But there's positives and negatives to that. But where it's impacting our hedgerows though is a problem. There is, as I was saying, so much room where we can plant more, and I think that there was some schemes that Department of Agriculture and that brought in to try and encourage farmers to do that, and I think that's something they should focus on, because I don't think many are going to do it off their own bat for cost wise. So if there was some sort of incentive that they could bring in to promote that and get that up and running a little bit more, I think would be positive.
There is a lot more kind of initiatives there, from Department of Agriculture like that, for promoting farmers to protect these assets on their farms and to plant more of them. Because what people don't realise is, like, hedgerow is like an M50 in Dublin, that it carries all the nature and wildlife in it. It has the birds, it has the bees, it has the moths, it has the mammals, and they all use this as the one big massive bed and breakfast. And they travel amongst it. There's food, there's shelter, there's areas to move from one field to the next without being seen. These things are an absolute highway of an ecosystem in themselves. And I think we did value it years ago, and I think there is a bit more of a hunger now to put a bigger value on this, to show that we talk about connecting our green spaces and green corridors and connecting, like, you're only as good as your neighbour down the road, what he's doing. But these hedgerows are the channels. These are the M50s, the motorways that connect our green spaces, that is going to protect and enhance our ecosystems and our nature, our flora and fauna going forward. And I think there needs to be a much better value put on them going forward.
I don't know how we get around promoting that. There's an awful focus maybe on just tree planting, but especially with we have to go back to what we mentioned at the beginning, that we have our National Tree Week. Maybe we could bring in this National Hedge Week, or get it maybe even mentioned under the umbrella of National Tree Week, so that it can be promoted a bit more. It can be kind of, you can get it out there into the atmosphere, but get it into the public space a bit more, and kind of educate people on what's good, what's bad, where we kind of should be at.
I think what the UK are doing in launch of this National Hedgerow Week is fantastic initiative, and I think we definitely should follow suit and try and do something similar here in Ireland, because we very similar kind of landscape and hedges in Ireland to the UK, and we've probably the same problems that they're having also. But it's not all about the birds and the bees and all. It's like I've fierce fond memories as a young lad, still to this day I do, going out to the hedgerows and in September and picking the blackberries, or going getting crab apples, or foraging in our hedgerows. Like, there's a lot of interaction that us as humans had many generations ago, and we kind of lost a little bit. And like, we'll probably be bringing this up in another podcast about growing your own food and getting your own food, and the importance of eating Irish produce. And like, our hedgerows have an abundance of fruits and nuts and stuff that are essentially free for us to go and pick. And I feel that if we could get our school kids out and learning about that, I think it could be a very valuable kind of lesson for them, to show this food is out there, go and eat it.
We could probably nearly do a whole episode on that, because there is so much out there in a hedgerow that you could forage from. Hugh Fernley waiting stall on River Cottage, I don't know whether you ever watched that, or anybody listening in watched that. He was a great guy for foraging in hedgerows, and what he could produce then in the kitchen from it was unbelievable. So there's definitely so much out there that I think there's more people are aware of that than I even realise. I don't know what you think about that,
yeah, it's coming a lot more kind of front and center in recent years in terms of people going out picking things in the hedgerows and stuff like that. Like, even if people wanted to get out this weekend and do something, and is the elderberries coming into flower this week, and you can pick the flowers off them and make some lovely elderflower cordial and stuff like that. So that's something that you could do tomorrow if you wanted. It's people are looking at what we're eating and what's going into our food, and we will be going into this more in another podcast. But yeah, like, I think there is a hunger there for stripping back our diet and looking to what we ate years ago, and these hedgerows are part of the answer for people to find what we should be eating, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely think so. Like, so if you were going to advise people now on planting a hedge, I'm going to plant a hedge in my back garden now. What, I have a reasonably good sized back garden, and I want to plant a new hedge along my boundary line. What would you suggest?
I would be looking at, depends what the function of the hedge is, but like, I would always say go with a lovely native Irish hedge with a nice mixture of flower and plants that will flower throughout the spring and summer. That would be my preferred choice, but sometimes that's not for everyone. It doesn't suit everyone's garden, and I particularly love a beech hedge. I think a beech hedge is very easy to plant. It's very easy to maintain. It has the beautiful lush green foliage in the springtime, and then it goes a bit darker during the summer, and then it retains its leaves to that lovely golden autumny colour throughout the winter, and it creates a lovely barrier for you throughout the winter months and doesn't drop the leaves. So there would be my kind of two. I would say a beech or a native Irish hedge would be my preferred choices. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. I couldn't. I'd probably somewhere along the same lines. I actually like a hornbeam hedge as well. I think they do turn out nice now. But I think if you make up a nice native mix of hedging, it gives a good effect, I think, anyway.
Absolutely. That kind of winds up about what we've kind of covered in hedges, and like what's happening in all these podcasts is that we touch on many different topics that we need to dedicate a whole podcast to themselves. So it's something that we're learning as we go along. Yeah. So we will be kind of exploring a few of these things as we go on over the next couple of weeks. And look, I hope you enjoyed the podcast today, and
we hope it gets you talking on all of these things yourself and gets a bit of discussion going. And what we're trying to do is publicize all of this so that more people are aware of it, and we hope that that's what's happening. Hopefully you've enjoyed our yabbering up to now, and you're dying to get more from us, dying to get more out of us. So as always, stay in touch as well. It's very important.
And if there's something in particular that you want to hear on the podcast the next couple of weeks, drop us a message. Tell us what you want us to talk about, and we'll happily discuss it. So I think that's all from us. Thanks a million, guys, and stay tuned to next week.
Thank you. See you next week. Bye-bye.